Hello, and welcome to the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. My name is Ryan, and I am a self-proclaimed Calvin and Hobbes superfan and expert.
And my name is also Ryan, although most people call me Indy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes. This episode, we're going to be talking about summer in Calvin and Hobbes and a little bit of spring, because summer especially plays a really big role in Calvin and Hobbes. Now, of course, before we get into all of that, we have to give our disclaimers that we don't own the rights to the strip. We're not affiliated with Bill Watterson and his syndicate, so we can't display any of the comics that we talk about. But as always, we will provide a blog post with the dates of publication so that you can look up the strips on Go Comics if you have a subscription, or we'll also give the books and page numbers, so if you have the books, you can look the strips that we mention up in your books. Okay, so before we get into it, we've got a couple of emails that we need to bring up. So our first one is from Elliot. Now, Elliot emailed us before about solving the mom lady problem, if you remember that.
That's right. Yeah, why even though she made the costume, Stupendous Man doesn't seem to understand that mom, lady, and mom are the same person.
Yeah, exactly. So he emailed us again. This subject line here is golf and gunpowder. So
I
I'll just
I
let you,
already love it.
yeah, I'll let you take a moment and figure out what that might refer to. And now I'll read you the email. He said, "Hey guys, I loved the sports episode, even better than I expected. I remembered a golf strip that got missed where Calvin is pitching a baseball to himself, misses, then gets a golf club and hits the baseball from the ground. That's in Weirdest from Another Planet. So when we did the Calvin Ball episode, we missed that golf strip. Good catch,
That's right.
Elliot.
Yeah, good call, Elliot. We did miss that one.
Yeah. And then also he says about the strip where Calvin's wearing a football helmet and has pillows tied to his body and says they seem to be out of gunpowder. He says he
Okay.
wonders if instead of trying to make himself bullet or cannonball proof, he really wanted to make himself into a human cannonball and shoot himself out of the chimney or something. I think that's a great idea. And I mean, we talked about Calvin being the human discus. Why not kick that up a notch and be a human cannonball? I could totally see Calvin going for that.
That's true. I definitely can also. Okay, so I don't know if that's enough to conclusively rule out the idea that he wanted to just make himself cannonball proof or whatever, but I agree. That is actually another good possibility. So yeah, maybe he was going to be the cannonball.
Yeah, it's at least a very plausible hypothesis.
Yeah. And I I'm not suggesting this is a reference to that, but it just made me think of it. But do you remember on the Tick where one of the superheroes was the human bullet?
I didn't watch The Tick very much. I know what it was, but okay, continue.
Okay. So since you knew what it was, you're probably aware it was pretty, I guess I'll say spoofy, like it was very
Yeah.
lighthearted and silly. So one of the other superheroes was the human bullet. And so when evil threatened, he would put on this like bullet costume and he'd turn to his son and go, "Fire me, boy." And so he'd get launched out of a cannon towards whatever was happening. I don't know if that was usually that effective. Like maybe he would just overshoot or something, but that was kind of the running gag. So, fire me, boy, and then he'd get launched out of a cannon towards the trouble or what have you.
Yeah, so that sounds exactly like the sort of thing Calvin would want to be, that
Yeah.
he would absolutely do that. So thank you, Elliot. And then we have one other email from Graham, who has emailed us a couple of times before. And so he's also talking about the Calvin Ball and sports episode. And he says, so he also points out something that we missed. So in that
Okay.
episode, I said that there aren't any references to basketball specifically. There
Right.
is
And I couldn't
one.
think of any either. So I had a couple of, I think I was saying, like, well, I guess maybe it could have been mentioned here or here, but none of those were right. So yeah, neither of us actually could recall any basketball references.
Yeah. So Graham found one from July 26th, 1995. It's a pop culture sort of comic, like Calvin is kind of talking about consumerism and stuff. And as Hobbes says that he can hear advertisers laughing, Calvin says, "Hold on, I need to inflate my basketball shoes."
Oh,
So
that's right.
yeah. So
Okay. All right. Well done, Graham.
yeah, so there is a reference to basketball. Good catch. And then he also says that second, he would like to give his rendition of the Very Sorry song. So in our uh, Calvin the Bard episode, episode 18, we gave our renditions of various songs in Calvin and Hobbes and invited any listeners who wanted to share their renditions. So Graham is a musician, and he put some guitar with this after listening to our
Okay.
versions. So we're going to go ahead and play that for our listeners. It was very well done.
So not only did a listener take us up on that, he's a musician himself, so even better.
Yeah. So here you go.
Here's a very sorry song, won't you help me sing along? I blew it, he's sorry, I knew it, so sorry. I'm very, very sorry that I took your precious flag. Just don't do it anymore, you scurvy scallywag. I'm free, I get free passage to Wig at 5. No, that's what you did last time, remember? Oh, yeah. Okay, the new rule is we have to jump everywhere until someone finds a bonus box. That's good. The only permanent rule in Calvin Ball is that you can't play it the same way twice. Score is still Q to 12. Ollie Wally Polly Wally up on fizz. Hey!
So thank you, Graham. That was fantastic.
Yeah, that
Keep
was
it coming.
amazing. Well done,
Yeah.
Graham, and thank you very much for sending that to us. We're really happy to play it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Indy, I think you had something to tell our listeners.
So, listeners, you know, if you've listened to this podcast, that a lot of times Ryan and I will ask each other trivia questions about the strip. So, we usually intersperse a few of those in each episode. Well, we've actually been thinking of dedicating maybe an entire episode to something like that. And this idea was inspired by Graham. So Graham had sent in some trivia questions specifically for Ryan. So there were top secret instructions that only I was supposed to read them. Ryan wasn't. And Graham, I emailed you back, as you know, but Ryan has not seen those.
I still haven't looked at them.
Right. So I'm saving those. So, listeners, we thought we might do a trivia episode where we each, using questions from you, would ask each other questions. So, if you would like to participate in this, feel free to email us trivia questions that you would like to be asked. So, what we'd like you to do is put something like trivia episode or trivia questions in the subject of the email and also specify who they're for. So, if you want them to be specifically for Ryan to answer, say that. Or if you'd like them to be for me to answer, say that. Or if you're not sure, I guess you could say that too. Then we'll just have to decide who looks at them and who doesn't.
Yeah, so maybe in the subject line you can put trivia questions for Ryan, and we'll know that that means Indy should read them, and I will eventually answer them. Or put questions for Indy, and then I'll know I should read them, and Indy will eventually answer them.
Yeah, so if you'd like to do that, then as always, you can email us at magiccnh@proton.me. And, we'd love to hear about you from other things too, like we always say. But if you'd like to do this, feel free to send us email messages. Now, we'll be accepting these submissions through August.
Yes, August 31st.
Yeah, so August 31st, and then that'll give us time afterwards to compile them and get the episode ready. And so then in a future episode, then we'll do that and submit your trivia questions. So listeners, if you'd like to do that, feel free. And once again, Graham, thank you for inspiring this idea, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And just real quick, a couple ground rules. These are meant to be trivia questions, so it can't be things like how many stripes are on Calvin's shirt in the third panel of the third strip on page 83 of Attack of the Drench. We won't be able to answer things like that. It needs to be something answerable, a trivia question about what happens in the strip, something like that.
Yeah, or not like, what's the 13th word of dialogue? Like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess someone might know that, but that's not really a trivia question. So
Right, so Indy and I will be the arbiters of what's a fair question. It's got to be something that someone could reasonably answer if they know Calvin and Hobbes pretty well. But within that, you can try to get a little tricky and see if you can slip something past us or stump us.
exactly. So as you know, I think we've done pretty good at the trivia we've asked ourselves, especially Ryan. So I don't know, you may have your work cut out for you, but we would love to try and love to be stumped. So yeah, send your best questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to it.
Now, The seasons are really important in Calvin and Hobbes. Back in episode 4, we talked about winter. I would say spring doesn't play as prominent a role as some of the other seasons, so we're only going to touch on it a little here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's a few strips that mention spring or sort of specifically take place in spring as opposed to being just, generic and happening to occur in spring. So, yeah, I would say that probably gets the least play as far as, being kind of called out as it being that season.
Yeah. So we'll just hit that briefly, and then we'll focus mostly on summer, which I would say plays a huge role. I think winter and summer are the two biggest. He really hits the themes there.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So with that said, let's quickly go over a few comics that do illustrate spring in Calvin and Hobbes, and then we'll spend the rest on summer. So a few that directly mention spring. There's one where it's not actually quite spring yet, it's winter, and Calvin has built some hideous snowmen that are clearly melting, and they're holding signs that say the end is nigh and spring is coming, is what it.
Yeah, repent, sinners.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say the snowmen may not have started as hideous. It's just they're melting away with the purging light of the sun, burning away their iniquity, I guess you might say, since they're prophets of doom. So, yeah, now they look hideous, but they may have been okay to start.
That's true. But yeah, Calvin calls them snowman prophets of doom. And his mom just kind of has this. I feel like her expression is almost just like, okay.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of on brand for Calvin at this point. So
yeah. There's another one where Calvin's dad says he's going to go out to do some spring cleaning, and mom says that's nice that he's doing that. And then we see him working on his bike, and she says, "What about the house?" And he says, "What about the house?"
Yeah. What you mean the house doesn't need cleaning?
Who cares about that? But
yeah, the bike's what's important.
I can't ride the house. And then another one that I enjoy, Calvin is just ecstatic. He says, Mom, I saw the first robin of spring call the newspapers. I'm going to be famous. This is going to be huge for me, and Calvin's mom is not giving him the reaction that he wants. And so Calvin is all depressed, and Hobbes says, cheer up. Did I tell you I saw a robin the other day?
Yeah, that one gives me kind of a student vibes too, with like how Calvin imagines things going versus the soul-crushing reality, you might say.
Yeah, nobody cares that you saw the first robin of spring. And also, it wasn't even the first robin of spring.
Yeah, I always got the impression, not just that his mother wasn't giving him the reaction that he wanted, but that she was kind of trying to break it to him gently. I mean, because I think she just says his name with an like, Calvin. Like, I was at the impression she was gonna try to, like, well, there's not really an award for this. It's not the deal you think that it is, but
well, I don't get the impression that she was like coming down on him or anything. Just like,
right.
You know what, kid? I'm sorry. This is not what you think it is.
Yeah, which almost makes what Hobbes says later all the funnier because he's just trying to cheer him up. He doesn't know anything about the robbers. Like, oh, guess what? Here's this great thing. So
yeah, and then there's one more that you actually brought up in the notes of that actually mentions spring. So would you like to describe that one for us?
Yeah, so this is one where Calvin and Hobbes are playing in the mud, and Susie comes up and wants to join them, and he turns her down. Oh, we're doing big important things. We don't have time for some girl. And he's like, you don't look like you're doing anything so important. You're just playing in the mud. And so they go back and forth. That escalates. He tries to throw mud at her, and then she's like, ha ha, you missed. Oink oink, pig playing in the mud. That kind of thing.
When he's scooping up the mud, she says, don't bend over, your curly pink tail shows.
That's right. He's like, well, I'll show you. But of course he misses, and she taunts him. So then he's just completely fuming. And then Hobbes remarks, ah, spring, that magical time of year when a young man's fancy turns to love. Calvin just says, shut up. That does mention spring specifically. And I guess, I don't know if this counts as a trivia question or not, but do you know what Hobbes is quoting there?
Ooh. I've heard the quote before. I know he didn't make it up, but I don't actually know what it's from.
Okay. Well, in fact, I don't know either. So I was hoping you did.
All right. Well, listeners, if you know what that's a quote from, let us know.
Yeah, no, actually, so I mean, I'm playing this off as a joke. I didn't mean it seriously though, because like you, I've heard that before. Like when Hobbes said that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that quote, but I don't know what it's actually from. So
Yeah. I know I've heard it, but
hmm
maybe it is originally from Calvin and Hobbes. For all I know, I don't think so. But
maybe I feel like I've heard that before though.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that Hobbes is using some quote to tease Calvin. But I think that might actually be the best spring one, as far as ones that mention spring. Just that one's so funny with the back and forth and the throwing the mud and all that. So there are also a few that kind of imply spring. They don't say that it's spring specifically, but they ran in March, April, or May and do springy sorts of things. So there's one where Hobbes says something like, "Oh, what a pretty sky today," and Calvin says, "It's too blue. It needs some red." And Hobbes says, "Some red?" And Calvin says, "Yeah, right over there." And then he's flying a kite, and Hobbes says, "Well, I'll be." So I think that one's kind of fun. And
Yeah, I kind of like that one because at first it's like, what is he talking about? And then it's like, oh, he put the red there himself. Okay.
yeah, and flying a kite is a very spring thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, there's another one where Calvin talks about how when it's sunny out, you can play baseball, and when there's like snow, you can, ride your sled and stuff like that. He says, "Oh, but when it's raining, the only sport is driving mom crazy," and he's holding a pot and a spoon. It doesn't say spring, but it ran in spring and April showers and all that. So,
By the way, have you ever seen a child actually do that?
oh yeah. So my son actually, when he was little, like he wasn't specifically trying to drive anyone crazy, but he just liked to have a big. It was a metal bowl that he would have, and he had a pencil, and he would just bing, 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 just
Okay.
for hours in my memory. It probably wasn't hours, but it felt like hours.
To you and your wife, it felt like hours, I'm sure. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That's funny because, like, yeah, I know that that's kind of a stereotype that young children like to do that. But yeah, actually, until fairly recently, I don't think I'd ever witnessed that. But yeah, I was eating dinner at some friend's house, and their 3-year-old then at one point like got like a metal pot and a wooden spoon, bang, 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 bang. And again, it wasn't like, now I'm gonna drive my parents crazy. It's just, this is amazingly fun when you're a child. So
yeah.
So I thought it was funny. That was my first time seeing it happen in the wild.
I would have to have my parents confirm, but I think when I was a kid, I would sometimes get the pots and pans out and set them up like a trap set, and
Oh,
but I mean, in my head, it sounded like I was awesome, I imagine, but
yeah, you're
maybe
on
not
stage
different.
at a rock concert.
Yeah. And then one more implied spring one that comes to my mind, again on the note of raining and bad weather, April showers sort of thing. Calvin is outside and it starts raining and he starts yelling at the universe, "Hey, no, you don't. I had big plans for today." Oh
that's
yeah,
right.
well, yeah, I'm not going in. It's man versus the elements. Ha, this is just a little bath, and he takes his clothes all off. I'll just splash around. And then it starts hailing, and he's like, "Hey, that's fighting dirty. Out, no fair, quit it." And as he runs inside, his mom says something like, "I'm sure there's an explanation for this, and I'm sure I don't want to hear it." And Calvin says, "The universe has an attitude, Mom." So
That's
again,
true. Yeah, he's running away mostly naked from the hail.
yeah. By the way, just while we're on that theme, I, I think we're okay to talk about this because it's in Calvin and Hobbes. What other strips can you think of where Calvin is running around naked?
All right, so there's a couple that come to mind. One is a Susie strip, and this is one that starts off in the soap opera style of art.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is the one where Susie is saying she's the president and he's the first husband.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So obviously, her idea for what's fun to pretend and his ideas converge and conflict pretty quickly. So then he's like, he takes off his clothes. He's like, "Me go to live in jungle with tiger friend," and he swings away supposedly on a vine. And then we see Calvin's mom getting a phone call, presumably from Susie's mom, saying, "What do you mean Calvin left his clothes with Susie?"
Yes, that's right. And
Yeah,
I think,
that's
don't we
one.
see Calvin walking by in his underwear with Hobbes while we see mom talking on the phone there?
Yeah, and I think he's saying like, "Boy, I'm glad to see you. You wouldn't believe the dumb stuff Susie can imagine."
Yeah.
That also, since we're on the subject of that one, that has one of my favorite lines because she's like, "Oh, this is a great dinner you fix, honey. What is it?" And he's like, "It's dog food, and don't call me honey.
Yes.
I'm
United
the
States.
president of the United States."
Yeah. You're not the president of the United States. You're the president of Diluted Fruitcakes Anonymous.
Yeah, another good line.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one. I think there's a couple others I can think of. Like, so one, this also involves kites.
Yeah.
So Calvin's trying to fly, so he's having Hobbes fly him as if he were a kite.
Right. He's
And
tied to
so
the
then
string.
yeah, so then it's like, well, I must weigh too much. How could I weigh less so I get more lift from the air or something? And so then it's like Mrs. So and so says there's a naked kid tied to a stuffed animal running through her yard.
And then I can't remember what, I think it's the dad who says, "It's your turn. I got the little nudist out of her bird bath, remember?"
Right. Yeah, so Calvin must have a reputation for this, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it comes up a couple more, like there's nude descending a staircase when he's taking his bath or supposed to be taking his bath. And yeah.
That's right. Yeah. There's one other where I think it's just that he's so hot, he imagines himself
That's right.
evaporating and then being rained back down minus his clothes. It's like, and then his mom finds the clothes. Oh, not again.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I imagine that one's a summer one.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those are the ones that come to mind. Are there any others you're thinking of?
No, I think that pretty much covers. I mean, I'm sure there are other ones because Calvin is sans clothes a surprising amount, but
That's true. It also depends, like, what we want to count as that, right? So you said running around
yeah,
naked, which I was kind of thinking outside the house. I mean, there's some strips where like he gets out of the bathtub and does something when he's supposed to be
right.
in it. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You could divide them up that way. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers. I was mostly thinking of the kite one. I think that one's so funny.
yeah, yeah, that's one of Calvin's. I guess I won't say many, but at least several attempts to try to fly.
Right. Yep. Yeah. There's also the one where he tapes a bunch of construction paper wings to his arms.
That's
I need
right.
momentum. I want you to throw me.
It's like, remember, I assume no responsibility for.
Right. I get the patent.
There's another one that I just thought of too, which also involves a kite, but this time it's like he's holding on to the kite string and trying to use it to fly off a cliff.
Oh, that's right. Yep. So that comes up a couple times. You're right.
Yeah, which I just want to say, like, strike one for the human spirit, right, Calvin? Humanity's quest to fly or be up in the heavens or whatever. So good for you, kid. It didn't work, but I appreciate the sort of human striving that represents.
Yeah, well, and in one of those, there's even a reference. Hobbes says, "Don't sell the bike shop, Orville." Talking about the Wright brothers. So,
That's right. I think that might be the one you mentioned with the
yeah, I think
with the
Heathers.
wing attached to his arms. Yeah.
Yeah. But coming back to spring, so I think there's one more.
spring.
There's actually another comic that mentions spring specifically, and I think it's a good segue into the rest of the episode because Calvin is standing outside and he says, "Ah, spring," and then the wind starts blowing and it's raining and the weather gets terrible, and then we see him inside on the couch saying, "I say, let's move on to summer." So I think that's a great segue.
Yeah.
Let's move on to summer.
Also, the universe really does have an attitude, apparently.
At least with Calvin, yeah. So, Indy, when you think of summer in Calvin and Hobbes, what are some of the themes that come to mind?
Okay, so I tend to think of like long days, trying to do as much as you possibly can, pack in all the fun that you could possibly squeeze into every moment. On that note, also maybe freaking out a little bit that summer's slipping away from you.
Yep.
and maybe occasionally being so delirious from how much fun you're having that you mistakenly think that you're bored.
Right. Yeah, we'll definitely see that one come up. So yeah, long days doing all sorts of activities. Also on the flip side of that, and uh, possibly contributing to the delirium, is days of doing nothing.
Yes,
Um,
especially nothing.
especially, yes. And then I feel like riding the wagon is kind of summer's answer to riding the sled in winter. And I
Agreed.
mean, it's not exclusive to summer. You know, they ride the wagon in other seasons too, but it comes up a lot in summer. I also think of water fights, one in particular that we'll get to, but just more broadly, you know, water balloons. It's kind of summer's answer to snowballs and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And then, of course, every summer, well, there's kind of a time warp thing here, but in the summer, Calvin's family goes camping, and they seem to do that more than once, despite Calvin being 6 every time. Uh,
It's funny. I mean, we've talked about this kind of thing before, but it's funny because Calvin will even reference this. So he, every time they go camping, he references the previous one, but he hasn't changed in age. So it's like what happened before, like has now been, I don't know, magically or whatever, transformed into what the past was. And
yeah,
now it's a 6-year-old Calvin trip again or
yeah.
anew or something.
I think he even, at least in one of them, might use the phrase last year.
Mhm.
So, you can't even really make the argument, oh, they went camping twice in the same summer or something, you know? So,
Yeah,
um,
maybe it just felt like it was a year ago because
yeah, there it is.
you'd almost forgotten how horrible it was at this point.
Right. But camping is such a big theme that we're not really going to spend any more time than this on that in this episode, and we'll come back to that in another episode.
Right.
I think there's enough to say about camping.
Yeah, I think there's at least 3 camping trips that we see in the course of this trip.
Yeah, and arguably at least a fourth one that's a little different, but again, yeah. So there's a lot to say.
Yeah.
Um, so let's go ahead though and dive into those other themes. So long summer days. So maybe we'll start from the minimalist approach and work our way up. So doing nothing. And so as we said, there's this caveat that can come with boredom. So Andy, could you explain how boredom and delirium might intertwine a little bit more?
Right. So, like I said, you can sort of be tricked or confused into thinking you're bored because as we all know, summer when you don't have to go to school or have all these annoying responsibilities is the best time in the world.
Absolutely.
Right. So pretty much by definition, summer has to be fun. It's always fun or more fun than other times or whatever. So
Yeah.
occasionally you might have so much fun with all of the things you're doing or all the nothing you're doing that you mistakenly like your mind gets a little wonky and you think that you're bored when really what happened was it was like awesomeness overload.
Yeah, I mean that's what Calvin tells us. Because Calvin's freaking out that school is about to start, and Hobbes says, you've been complaining about being bored out of your mind, and Calvin says, oh, I must have been delirious from having so much fun.
Right, which I mean that's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. So that may have come from doing nothing, but there are some specific references to nothing. For instance, there's a Sunday strip we mentioned back in episode 8 that I find interesting because this was before Bill Watterson had the new format, but he still drew it all as one solid panel, and so he had to make sure all the text was in the lower 2/3 so that the upper third could be cut off for editors who only bought the shortened version of the strips. And it's Calvin and Hobbes on the wagon going down a hill, and Calvin says, summer's almost over. Sure went by quickly. There's never enough time to do all the nothing you want.
Mhm.
So specifically doing nothing. There's also one where Calvin and Hobbes are propped up against a tree, and Calvin, actually, I think it's Hobbes who says, "You know what I love about summer days? They're just made for doing things, even if it's nothing."
And Calvin says, especially if it's nothing.
Yeah. On a similar note, there's one where Calvin is saying, summer, and they're leaning against a tree and he's saying that he doesn't have to do anything. And then we get the line, I can feel my brain beginning to atrophy. So,
Yeah, which is something he talks about more than once. So even during the school year, he'll say things like, yay, I'm home from school and just 6 short hours to forget everything I learned today.
yep. So we see how much Calvin values education.
Well, if they would read about dinosaurs, it would be a different story.
That would fix the issue. You're right. There's another one, again, propped up against the tree, and Calvin says, you know what day it is? And Hobbes says, nope. Why? And Calvin says, no reason. I was just curious. And then one of them says, I sure like summer vacation. And I remember that happening when I was a kid in summer. Just, what day is it? I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Who cares? Yeah. Yeah, no, I do too, actually. That was so, aside from just the joke of it, like I remember, I'm like you as a kid. It's like, I don't know what day it is. Whatever. Like, it's like every day is Saturday.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Except maybe Sunday. That's the one, even in summer, that you may have responsibilities and things, but
yeah. But I mean, you get 6 Saturdays a week at least then.
That's true. So you don't want to be greedy.
Right. Yeah. And then one other, Hobbes comes up to Calvin again, propped up against a tree, and says, what are you doing? And Calvin says, nothing. Nothing at all? Yep. I'll help. Please do. So there they are, just sitting against the tree doing nothing. There are also strips where they do things, but they're still basically doing nothing. So, for instance, the book The Days Are Just Packed is named after a strip where Calvin and Hobbes are climbing into a tree, and Calvin is explaining, he has a water balloon, he's explaining that the plan is to sit in the tree, wait till Susie walks under it, and then drop the water balloon on her. And Hobbes says, what if she doesn't walk under the tree? And Calvin says, then we just sit in the tree all day. I love summer. So, and that's when Calvin says the days are just packed. So
exactly,
they're doing something, but not really. There's another one where Calvin is talking about, the rat race and how people just think that what they do all day is so important, and it's really not. And Hobbes says, we spent our day looking under rocks in the creek. And Calvin says, I mean other people. Looking under the rocks, that's important. Other people are doing stuff like, going to Wall Street or whatever.
Yeah, which I gotta say, I kind of agree. I mean, looking under rocks, that's some quality time spent.
Absolutely. I would much rather be doing that.
Yeah.
On a similar note, there's one where Calvin and Hobbes are outside, and Calvin says, look, a trickle of water. And they kind of watch it for a little while. And then Calvin says, I'd say our afternoon just got booked solid. So, again, I remember doing that sort of thing as a kid. Just, who cares what we're doing? Look, there's water flowing. Let's see where it goes. And you can just spend an hour following that little trickle, or watching it, or floating leaves in it, or whatever.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same here. Like, I specifically remember that kind of thing. Like, if you're out walking around in the woods or whatever, it's like, oh wait, this trickle of water, sweet. And then it's like you said, we're just gonna see where it goes, or maybe like take a stick and dig a little trench and divert part of it, or I mean, that, like, similar with the rocks, like I can remember as a kid wandering around outside doing that sort of thing. And all joking aside, I think that is kind of important. I mean, you're sort of connecting with nature and seeing things, and just learning in a certain kind of way. Just right. I don't know, just this interaction with the natural world, and just kind of taking this sort of pure joy out of discovering that. I think that is really important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and summer is a great time for that. There's another strip where, kind of similar to the Days Are Just Packed one, where Calvin and Hobbes are packing up some water balloons and loading them up into the treehouse. And while they're doing that, they're talking about how, I don't have it in front of me, but someone says, like,
oh, I know, it's idle hands are the devil's workshop.
Yeah. And Calvin says, I resent that. We work darn hard at this. And they're hoisting the water balloons up, and there's just like a sign stuck in the grass that says, what does the sign say?
I think it's something like, come stand here or big
Yeah,
surprise.
And there's
Something
a
like
big that's right. Big surprise. Stand here. There's an X, and they're ready to drop a water balloon on anyone who stands there, preferably Susie, I assume.
presumably Susie. Because, and like you said, this is the parallel to Winter. He's done this kind of thing before. It's like, oh, important message up ahead. He leads her to a spot with these signs, and then he's like about to dump a bunch of snow on her or something. So this actually has worked in the past.
Yeah, important message. Look out. And there's another one where there's a rope dangling down, and it has a piece of paper on it that says pull. And Susie looks up and she says, "Nice try." And Calvin's up in the tree, and the rope is attached to a bucket of snowballs. And Calvin's like, "Darn, darn, 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 darn." This is Summer's answer to that.
Yeah, so we might say he's 1 for 2 in that. So we don't know if this breaks the tie or not.
Yeah, we don't know if the water balloon one works, but I'm going to say it does, because I mean, they're working so hard at it. Now, this one is actually really more about weekends, but like we just said, summer is basically every day is Saturday, so I feel like it applies here too. I'm thinking of the one where we see Calvin running through some brush, and he's carrying a flag, and then he's crossing a creek, and all these other things, and then climbing a tree, switches out a flag, does it all in reverse, and then gets to Hobbes and says time, and Hobbes says 10, 15 something minutes, and oh, that's our best one yet. And then Hobbes takes a turn, and Calvin says weekends don't count unless you spend them doing something completely pointless. So again, doing something but not really.
Exactly. And again, I mean, I remember doing maybe not exactly that, but this kind of thing as a kid. Like,
Yeah.
Can you think of any sort of like challenges like that you and your friends did when you were young?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of stuff like a lot of times it would involve a ball, like kind of a keepy uppy game where let's see how many times we can keep the ball in the air. We invented sports type things to play sometimes, stuff like that, or even just like rollerblading around.
Okay.
That sort of thing. What about you?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely lots of games about keeping something from hitting the ground. That can be a pretty core element. In addition, probably like the most similar to the flag thing, at least in a way, was I remember this one time my friend had this fort in his backyard. I guess I call it a tree fort. Like, I think it started on the ground, but it actually went up into the tree. But there were multiple levels. So we did this thing where it was like we'd take turns, and you'd have to set up what I guess quote unquote we'll call traps for the other person to like see how well they could get past them and get to the top of the fort.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was pretty fun. And so that's the thing I remember doing that's maybe the biggest parallel to the kind of see who can do the best switching out the flags or whatever. So
Right.
Yeah, which obviously that looks fun too. Like just let's see who can go and get the flag and switch it and come back. Like, okay, I'm up. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't do that specifically as a kid. We didn't have the right setup for it, but I would have.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And then there are the summer strips where they're just active. And, the things they're doing aren't, I guess, what you would call productive from the perspective of a lame adult. But for a kid, these are good things to be doing with your time, I would argue. So, like we've been saying, there's a couple that depict Calvin and Hobbes doing a million different things. There's 2 Sunday strips that are both silent, but they show, in one of them, they're tumbling and chasing frogs, and they're in the treehouse, and Hobbes is pushing Calvin on a swing, and all these things. And then Mom asks Calvin to take out the trash after he's been doing all these things, and he goes, "Some summer vacation this has turned out to be."
That's true. Which, I mean, obviously we see the joke, but I can kind of empathize too. It's kind of like, oh man, everything was going great. Then it gets interrupted with this dumb chore.
Yeah. And I can see both perspectives. Obviously, I get Mom wanting Calvin to help, and both for his benefit and for hers.
Right.
But I can see Calvin's perspective of, I'm in the middle of something here, Mom. So.
Yeah.
And then there's another one that's very similar, and I feel like this is kind of the iconic Calvin and Hobbes summer strip. it's again a mostly silent strip. This is in the new format, so there's like 19 or 20 panels of Calvin and Hobbes just doing things. They run out the door in the morning just full of energy. They're playing in the pool. They're playing Calvin ball. They at one point they're fighting. They do something to Susie. It's they hit her with a water balloon. At the end, they're catching fireflies. Just all these things. And then Calvin's mom drags him inside, and he says, "Summer days are supposed to be longer, but they sure feel short to me." And Hobbes, I can't remember who says what, but then the other one says, "Yeah, I'll say we didn't get to do half our itinerary." And I feel like that one that's summer, and that's Calvin's summer.
Exactly. That's very iconic, and I think, I mean, again, that's something we can all relate to, but it also makes me wonder, like, I wonder what the rest of the itinerary was. So yeah, and it's funny too, because they weren't just sort of, that makes it sound like they didn't just do nothing or whatever they felt like. They actually had a plan. It's like, oh no, here's our to-do list for the summer. I mean, they're fun things, so it counts as fun instead of work, but it's like, yeah, we actually had this planned out, but we didn't get to half of them.
Yeah, and actually here I have the list of things they were doing. So they're reading comic books, they're playing with dart guns, they're taking silly pictures, they're playing in the kiddie pool, and Hobbes is stealing Calvin's swim trunks. They're digging for dinosaurs, they're looking under rocks, like we talked about, playing Calvin ball, looking up at presumably clouds, fighting, hitting Susie with water balloons, climbing a tree, and selling suicide drink, as it's called, running away from a snake, looking at the moon through binoculars, and catching fireflies. This is a jam-packed day, and they're saying they have more.
Yeah, I think that counts as seizing the day. That's one they talk about too. Maybe we'll talk about in a second, but it's, they list off all the stuff that they have done, and I think Calvin says, "I consider this day seized," and then tomorrow we'll seize the day and throttle it.
Yes. And so on a similar note, there's one where Calvin walks up to his dad and says, "Oh, just so you know, I am the downhill tumble and roll champ, king of the toad finders, captain of the high altitude tree branch Vista Club, second place finisher in the round the yard backward dash, premier burper state division, sod buster and worm scout first order, and generalissimo of the Mud and Mayhem Society." And dad says, "Busy day? About usual. Want to hear what Hobbes is?" And that strip doesn't say it's summer, but it ran in summer. And it's again, just, this is Calvin's summer. This is what you do. He sees the day and throttles this.
Exactly. And again, so you mentioned, what a lame adult might think was productive before, but actually his dad is seemingly very proud of him for this. He has this big this really pleased smile on his face. Yeah, and he really does want to hear all that Calvin did, and so, which I think makes perfect sense, right? So it's not that oh, this is goofing off, you should be doing something productive. It's, you should be doing something real, and so this is what Calvin's dad wants him to do, and that's something we'll probably talk about in a second too. It's like this, he thinks this is great, so this is exactly the kind of thing Calvin's dad wants Calvin to be doing.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a second, because so I mentioned catching fireflies, and so I want to hit a couple of firefly strips, and one of them will hit on what you're talking about, with dad being very much in favor of that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So but before we get to that, first there's one where Calvin sees a firefly, and then he kind of gets this like I don't know how better to say it, almost like this constipated expression on his face. His eyes are
we could say.
Yeah. And
then Hobbes says, "Your rear hasn't lit, if that's what you're wondering."
Calvin says, "I can't even tell which muscle to flex."
Which is true. I can't tell either. Every time I've tried it hasn't worked.
I've never been successful at it. Listeners, if you've ever been no, just kidding.
Hey, I mean,
I mean, if you have been successful, let us know.
Your rear to light up on command, let us know, because we want to know this, and I'm sure some scientists might be interested too.
Yes.
But so on that note, there is a case where Calvin successfully becomes a firefly, sort of.
Right. Yeah, because they're in bed at night, and so the panel is completely black, and then it lights up, and Calvin is smiling, and then it's black again, and then it's lights up again, and Calvin's smiling, and he says, "I'm a firefly." And Hobbes says, I see the flashlight.
Which is funny too, because until we get to the last panel, you don't really know what's going on. It's like
Yeah.
just Calvin's happy and weirdly lit up for some reason.
I also just have to wonder if that might have happened when Bill Watterson was up against a deadline and he was like, well, if I do this idea, I can just color 2 panels completely black.
That's possible, although that seems
The
like
amount
kind
of
of a
care.
random thing to think up if you were just I don't know if this makes sense or not, but like it's like, oh man, I'm at a deadline, I have to think of something. It's I don't know if that's what you would come up with exactly, but
Yeah, well, and I say that pretty much completely jokingly because the amount of care Bill Watterson put into Calvin and Hobbes, like, I think he was doing it from a, oh, this would be a funny joke, not a, oh, this lets me get a comic done faster.
yeah, I think so too. Although it would be funny if it were sort of accidentally inspired by his real life, like maybe I don't know, like maybe he was in bed and then there's a lightning flash, or like his wife had
Yeah.
a light for some reason and off, and it's like, oh, it's like a firefly. I don't know, but
I mean, that could be, I know in the 10th anniversary book, he talks about, people always ask cartoonists how they get their ideas, and the answer is so boring that we're usually tempted to make something up. And the answer he gives is, he would just like sit outside with a notebook and maybe a weird rock would suggest an idea or something. And you, basically you stare at a piece of paper for a while until inspiration hits. And
yeah,
he said,
he also says at one point that like searching for inspiration can look a lot like goofing off to people.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which makes an interesting parallel with what we were saying before, like looking under rocks or finding a trickle of water running through the dirt. Like that's not just good for Calvin, that probably is good for the creative process.
Right. And he did also say that occasionally the cartoonist will find himself in a beam of light and angels will appear with a great idea, but not often. So,
yeah, more often it's a puddle of sweat.
right. But let's talk about that story you were just mentioning where Calvin's dad wants him to do real things. So Calvin's watching TV and his dad makes him go outside. And how does Calvin feel about this?
Oh, he's incensed about it. How rude, how dare he? And I'll show him I refuse to have fun. I think Hobbes says something like, "Oh, how cruel to be forced to play."
Yes. But then what happens?
So then, they're out, they're running around. It's like, oh, this race will determine the champion of the universe or something. And then, oh, wait, how long have we been out there? And, oh, I don't know, an hour or so. Oh, wait, just a sec. So he runs up to the window to his dad. I'm not having fun. So then he runs back to lose track of time with Hobbes again.
Right. Yep. And then at the end, Dad comes out and says, Calvin, it's time to come in. Ah, Dad, we're catching fireflies. And then Dad gives him this whole spiel about, see, you didn't want to go out and now you don't want to come in. And now you'll have memories of something real you did instead of something fake you just watched. So, clearly Calvin's dad is 100% supportive of being outside, doing things that to a lame adult maybe don't really matter, but are actually important.
Yeah, but to a wise adult like Calvin's dad, those really do matter quite a bit.
Right. And then, of course, we also get a reference to building character here. Nothing spoils fun like finding out it builds character.
Yeah. But it's true. It turns out the kinds of fun that build character are the most fun. So,
well, yeah. And then I want to just highlight a few comics that convey kind of the general feeling of summer. So there's one that's just a single panel. Calvin and Hobbes are outside on the front porch. They have corn on the cob, and Calvin is saying, summer is butter on your chin and corn mush between every tooth. And Hobbes says it was nice of your parents to let us eat outside, which is maybe a double meaning there, but
that makes me want some buttered corn now.
Yeah. I mean, that feels like summer. You eat outside, you have cookouts, and among the things that you cook, corn on the cob. That's very much a summer thing. There's another one like that doesn't refer to summer specifically, but it's got to be in summer. He's talking about having eaten a popsicle, and now he's got popsicle stuff all over him. I'm a syrupy mess. Who can I hug? Hobbes is like, I'm sitting over here.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing too. I remember from a kid, obviously, like we had these, these plastic, I'm not sure what to call them. I guess molds with like a handle
yeah.
kind of, so like you could pour fruit juice in them
Hmm.
and freeze them, and then it's like, oh, now you have this orange juice popsicle or whatever. So I remember that as a fairly
Yep.
young child taking those outside and running around. And
Yep. I remember having, yeah, you make your own popsicles. It's cool.
yeah,
And there's one I forgot to mention. I want to come back to. So along the lines of having jam-packed days, and I feel like this also just kind of generally gives the feeling of summer. There's one where Calvin is outside, it's night, and his mom says it's time to come in, and Calvin's like, all right, start the stopwatch.
oh, that's right.
And so at first he pretends not to hear her, and he's like, the trick is basically plausible deniability. You gotta wait until she's so angry that she starts to come looking for you. You don't answer until then. So Calvin, Calvin, Calvin. Okay, that's it. Are you calling me? Okay, we'll go for the fake agreement. He's just doing all these things to try to avoid coming in. Every minute.
Stall the inevitable.
Yeah. Oops, I lost my shoe, and he throws his shoe into the bushes.
That was maybe the least plausible part of it, but okay.
Right. But his reasoning is every minute spent outside and awake is a good minute. And so,
I think my
summer.
favorite part of that too is like when she says something like, it's getting dark or something. It's like, oh, she made a tactical blunder. Darkness is relative. It's like, it's not that dark. I can still see blah, blah. I forget exactly what he says.
I can still see my hands.
Yeah. And she's like, well, I didn't say it was, I forget what she says, but she kind of
She says it's dark enough.
Yeah. I was like, darn, she shut it down before we could really get into trying to define terms.
Yeah. Calvin.
Yeah, I get a big kick out of that.
Calvin's dad is a lawyer, and I think here we see some of Calvin following in his dad's footsteps a little bit.
That's probably right. Whether he'd be proud at this particular moment, I don't know. But yeah, I do want to know, again, so relatable. I mean, not just in terms of having to come in when it's dark or whatever, but I don't know, the whole, how can I maneuver this, knowing what I know of my mother, to like keep doing what I'm doing, or
how can I avoid going to bed for as long as possible?
Yeah, or
especially in summer.
Really related, but it also reminds me of kind of like I don't know, you can probably relate to this. Maybe a lot of our listeners can, like, you're a kid and you're out somewhere and your parents, talking to some other adults or whatever. So you're running around with your friends or some other kids. It's like, oh, we're about to go, come on. But then inevitably, if you come back, they'll just sit there talking to the other adult.
Yes.
And so then, you're like, all right, well, we're not really going. So you run around with your friends again. And then, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of that, like negotiating. Are we really going? Or was this just like the fake out version, or the pseudo we're about to go? Because then, oh, she's still talking to Mrs. Whoever for 15 minutes. But I shouldn't have to just stand here. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And then one more that I feel like just kind of captures the essence of summer. Calvin says, it's hot, it's humid, it's buggy, there's no breeze, and the air is full of pollen. But it's summer! And he runs off to go play. Which, I mean, okay, when I was a kid, and even now, I really liked summer, even more so as a kid. But, it would get that way. It's 90 whatever degrees out. You're gonna go outside and melt. But darn it, it's summer. I'm taking advantage of this. And as a kid, it's almost like, I don't care how hot it is. Like, whatever. My face is bright red. I don't care. Like, it's summer.
You might care later, but
yeah. But right now, I'm playing.
Yeah. No, same here. I mean, depending on where we were, because we moved sometimes, but like either it would be hot or it'd be really hot. But I mean, whatever. It's time to run around outside. So.
Yep. So that's the jam-packed days, or the days doing nothing. But we also said summer is a lot about wagon rides. And I feel like we need to take some time to mention that. So like we say, this is kind of summer's answer to sled rides. So quick note, Calvin doesn't seem to give the hills names as often when riding the wagon as he does when riding the sled. So he does name Lookout Hill, because that's what Hobbes yells whenever they go down it. But That's the only named hill I can think of with the wagon ride, as opposed to the sled rides that have Rigor Mortis Ridge and Pallbearer Peak and Doom Drop and stuff like that.
Now, what about Mount Maine? Is that winter too, or could that be a summer one?
I believe that one is also winter. Let me just,
Okay.
we'll confirm this.
I wasn't sure, but that's one that came to mind at least.
Yeah, okay, here we are perched at the peak of Mount Maine. Why? Because I like to experience life at the fullest. I say you don't appreciate life until you risk losing it. And yeah, it's on a snow-covered hill, and it ends with them drinking hot chocolate in front of a fire. Because Hobbes says, actually, I think real living is sitting by a fire slurping marshmallows from the bottom of a mug of hot cocoa.
He does have a point with that one.
It's yeah, I am with Hobbes on that.
Okay. Yeah, so that is kind of an interesting fact about that even though presumably these are the same hills, right? That in the winter you can sled down, in the summer or whenever you can ride down a wagon, but they only seem to get the names during the sledding segments.
Yeah. But the wagon rides do still tend to end in the same sort of catastrophe. So,
right.
There's one where we see the aftermath. They're sitting up in a tree, and at first we don't know that this was a wagon ride, but they're talking about, wow, we're up so high, you certainly can see far from here. Yeah, I'm glad we're up here. And then it zooms out. That was quite a crash, wasn't it? And you see the wagon wedged in a couple of branches. So, there's that. There's let me back up actually, because like the sled rides, the wagon rides tend to be allegorical. So Calvin is talking about whatever is on his mind, and the scenery is often a visual metaphor for whatever he's talking about. So, for instance, there's one where he's talking about valleys and hills, and how he compares the valleys to, low moments in your life, bad times, things going downhill, and when they're going, and then he talks about how there are peaks of success. And he talks about how he's going to just jump from peak to peak and always have good things happen to him. And I think that's a particularly interesting metaphor, because while he's talking about going downhill and that being a bad thing, that's when it's easy and he's having fun. And then when he's talking about peaks of success, they're dragging the wagon uphill, and Waterson does a really good job of making it look difficult. So you can take that a couple of different ways.
Yeah, that's actually something that always strikes me as a little weird in general, not just with the strip, because it's like, yeah, we have this metaphor that, if things go downhill, that's bad, and like a peak is good. But also if we say, that's an uphill battle, that's bad. And so we have these sort of parallel but opposite metaphors based around uphill or downhill or highs and lows. And it kind of doesn't make sense in a way. It's like you said, well, the downhill is the easy and or fun part usually, but we tend to say things downhill, that's a bad thing instead of a good thing.
Yeah, that's the part that people like on roller coasters, so.
Yeah. I mean, granted, to channel Calvin's dad again, I guess, it's like an uphill part, you get the anticipation, right?
That is true. Yeah. Look how high we are.
Yeah. I was like, but so yeah, I mean, it's not that either metaphor doesn't make sense. It's just the fact that we have both of them kind of makes both of them seem weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. There's another one where they're talking about how ignorance is bliss, or specifically Calvin is talking about how ignorance is bliss. And so this comes back to the catastrophe that I was about to mention before I backtracked. So in this strip, Calvin says, ignorance is bliss. It's better to not know things. If you know things, you start to care about things, and that's not fun. And I say phooey to that. And then Hobbes says, we're heading for that cliff. And Calvin says, I don't want to know about it. And then, of course, they go off the cliff and crash. And so, visual metaphor going with, is ignorance really bliss? And, Hobbes is like, I don't think I can stand so much bliss.
That's right. And doesn't Calvin say something like, careful, we don't want to learn anything from this?
Exactly. There's another one where he's talking about how choices bring new choices, and he actually uses the wagon ride to illustrate this. He says, take this fork in the road, for instance. Arbitrarily, I choose left, and that will bring up new choices. And, here's a cliff, so that gives us the option of riding along the side of it or jumping it. And Hobbes says, I know with
some dismay you've chosen to jump.
Yeah, right. And that will bring up new choices, like should we bail out or die on the landing? Right. If we hadn't taken that fork in the road, we never would have been here. Let's jump.
I also love how deadpan Hobbes' delivery is too.
Yes.
Like, oh no, I was like, I note with some dismay.
And then there are some though, well, and then there's some that don't end in crashes, but most do. But there's one where he's talking about how things go by so quickly, and we see the scenery becomes a blur as he's saying that. So just a lot of visual metaphors that go with the wagon rides, and a lot of crashes. Not always a crash. We talked in the time machine episode about how they go down the hill trying to time warp and then just end up at the bottom of the hill. But
It is
a
2
lot of
minutes
times,
later.
yeah. But a lot of times it ends in some sort of crash, just like the sled rides.
Yeah.
So that's all I have to say about wagon rides, unless you have anything else you'd like to add. Okay,
Well,
great.
I think you're right. I mean, it definitely serves a parallel purpose to the sleds, which we've talked about before. They both often end in a crash or calamity of some sort. It's usually a visual metaphor. But I also think it's funny that Calvin, from time to time, either draws the opposite conclusion or comes to it in a different way. Like in some cases, like you mentioned, he's talking about how, wow, things go by so quickly. Isn't that terrible? But then there's another one. I think this is also a wagon ride where he's saying like, oh, I say, let's just get where we're going, figure out your destination and hit the gas. We don't have time to blah, blah, blah. But then they get to the bottom. It's like, boy, that was over quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he kind of learns the same lesson, but for a different reason sometimes.
Right. So yeah, the wagon rides are a lot of fun, like the sled rides. And then, so we said that the wagon rides are the answer to sled rides. So we also said water fights, and maybe water balloons specifically, are kind of summer's answer to snowball fights in the winter. In summer, Calvin uses water balloons a lot, as he would use snowballs, mostly to get Susie, sometimes to get Hobbes. Now, of course, there's one instance where he tries to use a snowball in summer. He saves it in the freezer for months and months, and then has it in June.
Mm-hmm. Which I always thought, kind of in retrospect, it's like his parents must have known about this. So
Yeah.
they were, somewhat, I don't know, permissive or generous with what they were allowing their rambunctious 6-year-old to do at this point. It's like, I feel like I wouldn't have gotten away with that as a kid, if for no other reason than like, I need this space to put our food. Like, you can't put snow in the freezer. What are you doing?
Yeah, why is this snowball in here? I'm gonna even, maybe just not even thinking about, oh, Calvin probably put this in here. Just like, oh, what? That's weird. I throw it outside.
Yeah. Oh, I guess we need to defrost this. It's like,
yeah. But so he saves it. He's getting ready to smack Susie with it. He's like, she'll never expect a snowball in June. This is gonna be great. And then he misses. I can't believe it. I missed. I saved that snowball for months, and oh, this is the worst. It must have been a cross breeze. And Susie is scooping up the snowball and then nails Calvin with it. And
yeah,
the irony here is just sickening.
Yeah, which I feel really bad for Calvin in this strip too. I mean, I guess you could say he's being kind of a jerk, but given all the planning that he went through for this, and it is kind of a clever idea, then to not only miss but then get hit himself, like, I feel sorry for him.
Yeah, poor Calvin. Although, Susie didn't do anything. Well, okay, maybe hitting Calvin with the snowball was sort of doing something wrong, but up to that point, she hadn't done anything wrong.
Well, so, other than being a slimy girl, I guess we would say.
Right. Yeah, which, okay, fair. But
yeah. Like we talked about in the Stupendous Man episode, annoying girl was, walking while being a girl, so clearly she needs to be dealt with.
Exactly. But then there's a strip where Calvin is escalating water battles with Hobbes. So it starts with Calvin surprising Hobbes and squirting him with a little squirt gun. Hobbes retaliates with a water balloon, and then Calvin plans to get Hobbes with the hose. He's like, nothing can beat a hose for sheer water power, unless you went so far as to, and we see Hobbes dragging a full kiddie pool. I'm not sure if his plan is to dump it on Calvin or to pick Calvin up and dunk him in it, but either way, he's got the ultimate weapon there, I guess.
Yeah, I always interpreted that as he was going to try to dump it on Calvin, although dumping Calvin in it might be a better plan,
It'd
really.
be easier, but yeah, it does look like he's getting ready to unload it on Calvin.
Yeah.
There's a similar one where Hobbes gets Calvin with a water balloon, and Calvin wants to retaliate with the hose, and he runs up to Hobbes and click, click, click. Wait, what's wrong? Why isn't this working? And Hobbes goes, "Oh, I had to disconnect it to fill up the water balloon," which he has another one of. And Calvin goes, "Oh no!" And Hobbes soaks him again. Uh, and this is actually a rare instance where Calvin says he's actually sort of looking forward to going back to school next week because, this sort of thing is happening to him.
Yeah. Now, I feel like he would probably get over that feeling quickly, but
Yeah, I would say so.
yeah. I always kind of wondered about the timing on this strip too, because it's like, okay, so he gets the hose to spray Hobbes, right? So at that point, presumably he would have at least thought that it was still connected and turned on.
Right.
So that makes me think between then and when he encounters Hobbes, that's when Hobbes like went around and disconnected it and filled up the water balloon. Because otherwise it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Like if he would either have to not know that the hose was on, which seems weird, or not know that it was connected, which makes even less sense.
Okay, well, here's my only possible, probably not really workable solution to that problem. Maybe Calvin's dad had been using the hose to clean the car or something and just left it there, which doesn't sound like Calvin's dad. I feel like he would put things away when he's done. But, maybe for some reason it's left sitting out away from the connection point, and Calvin just assumes that since it's there, it's been left on.
That's possible.
It's pretty weak, but that's the best I can come up with.
Yeah. So, I mean, it has to be something like that. So he has to believe that the hose is turned on and not know that it isn't connected anymore. So there has to be some kind of explanation for that.
Yeah. There's also a bunch of strips where Hobbes bests Calvin despite Calvin being more or better armed. So there's one, for instance, where Calvin runs up to Hobbes with a water balloon and gets ready to throw it, and Hobbes says, "As if life isn't short enough." And so Calvin just sits down with this angry expression on his face.
Which is interesting, though, because there's a similar strip where it goes the other way.
Yeah, where he comes up to Hobbes and says, "What would I like?" He's not even trying to be sneaky. He says, "What would you do if I soaked you with this water balloon?" And Hobbes says, "Take the worst thing you can imagine and multiply it by 100. You do that? No, I'd do something even worse." And
then we see Calvin running away, saying he piqued my curiosity.
And there's a Hobbes dripping water running behind him.
Yeah, which honestly, that would be kind of hard to resist, right? I mean, presumably that would be bad to suffer whatever it was, but you would just have this burning desire. It's like, what could he possibly be thinking of? So,
yeah, only one way to find out. And then there's one where Hobbes has this long kind of floppy balloon. It's not aerodynamic at all. And Calvin has a much more round balloon, and he's taunting Hobbes, "Mine is much better, and clearly I'm superior." And then Hobbes just lets go of the end of his balloon and squirts Calvin with it. Pretty smart.
Yeah.
There's one where Calvin's like, "I have a water balloon and you don't. Like, basically, I'm in charge. You have to do whatever I say. What do you think of that?" And what does Hobbes say?
Because I think I'll poke your water balloon with this stick.
And then there's one. Well, yeah. And so Calvin, what does Calvin say at the end of that one?
I think it's something like that's the problem with weapons technology.
That's right. Yeah.
It goes obsolete so quickly.
Yeah, that's right. Because I was confusing that with the next one that I had in mind, where Calvin has 3 water balloons to Hobbes's 1, and so I have more firepower than you have, so I'm clearly superior. And Hobbes throws his balloon and says, "Catch." "Whoa, wait, my arms are full." And he throws his 3 water balloons up in the air, and they all soak him. And that's where I was getting confused, because in that one, Calvin says, "We superpowers have it tough," and Hobbes says, "Maybe you should stock up on brains instead."
Dang, sick burn, Hobbes.
Yeah.
I do wonder too if that could have been any kind of like political metaphor at the time, or
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a coincidence, but
Yeah, it would absolutely be on brand for Watterson.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of puts me in mind of an earlier strip where they play war. I think we've talked about this before in
Mhm.
Calvin, like, well, I'll be the fearless American defender of democracy, and you can be the godless communist oppressor. And then it's like, okay, if you get hit with a dart, then you're dead. And so they both shoot and they both get hit. And kind of a stupid game, isn't it?
Yep, and that one is very clearly commentary.
Yeah. So this one could at least be like on a similar vein, or it could just be a funny strip, but it
Yeah.
wouldn't surprise
Well,
me, like you said.
and there's another one where Calvin comes up to his dad and says, "How do soldiers killing each other solve the world's problems?" And Dad has no answer. And
Yeah.
Calvin's like, "I think adults just act like they know what's going on." But uh, so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this was commentary, but yeah, it could also just be that's a funny quip that Hobbes jabs at Calvin at the end there.
Yeah.
And
And a
then there's
funny
one more.
visual of Calvin
Yeah,
trying unsuccessfully to keep 4 water balloons in the air and getting splooshed with all of them.
yeah, that's a good one. And then there's one more kind of in a similar vein where Calvin is filling up a water balloon and then it slips off and oh no, and then Hobbes is going to be here any minute because they're having a water fight.
Right.
I got to fill up another one. Oh, it came off the end of the hose. It's squirting him, and so he just keeps not being able to fill it. He keeps soaking himself, and then Hobbes runs up with his water balloon, yeah, and then stops. Gee, what's the point? Like Calvin already got himself more than I ever could, so and he just
Yeah, he
walks
just kind of
off.
walks away and Calvin's still dripping wet.
Yeah. But I think my favorite water fight during summer thing in Calvin and Hobbes is when Calvin and Hobbes are having a water fight and Susie comes up and asks to join. I love this arc. So she says,
Oh,
"Can
yeah.
I play?" And he says, "Ha, war is a manly art." And she says, "Suppose anything so stupid would have to be. Can I play in your game or not?" Which maybe some more commentary there.
Yeah.
But so Calvin says, "I don't know. It seems you'd rather be making smart remarks."
I don't know. That makes me laugh more than it should, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But ultimately, Susie's allowed to play, so she runs off to get her swimsuit, and Calvin lets her play with the condition that Hobbes is on his team. She's like, I can beat you and your tiger any day. And so Hobbes is on Calvin's team, sort of.
Kind of.
But he's like, "Ooh, girls flip for guys in jams." And we've talked about before that maybe a 80s term or something, because neither of us was real familiar with jams. But
Yeah, or maybe a regional thing or something.
yeah.
But
anyway,
either way, it turns out Hobbes is correct because
yes.
when
Oh, he's
Susie
wearing
returns, like,
jams.
yeah, oh, it's so cute. He's wearing jams. It's like, fine. Yeah.
But so he's like, "All right, listen up. I like this name for Hobbes because a lot of times he calls him Fuzzhead or whatever. And this one he calls him Yogurt Brain, which where did that come from?" But all right, listen up, Yogurt Brain. Here's the plan. I'll draw Susie's fire while you soak her with the water balloon.
It's not a bad plan, except for one crucial flaw.
Yeah, if Hobbes weren't a traitor, it would have worked. But
Yeah, I think a lot of things are like that.
yeah. Because then Susie comes around the corner of the house and we see Hobbes as a stuffed animal just sitting there with a water balloon in his lap. And she's like, "You're a great double agent. Thanks, Hobbes."
Which is hilarious that Susie actually says that. It's like, so because it's like she's playing along to the extent that it makes sense for her. It's not just, oh, Calvin just left his stuffed animal guy in the water balloon. It's no, Hobbes is a double agent specifically.
Yeah, I like that. I think Watterson had to draw Hobbes as a stuffed animal there.
Right.
But I like that it kind of gives a window into, okay, maybe Susie doesn't see Hobbes quite the way Calvin sees him, but she's definitely willing to pretend he's real.
Yeah.
Even by herself.
Yeah, she doesn't see him the same way Calvin does, obviously, but she sees him in maybe a closer way than most people other than Calvin would. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. This is kind of a strange thing to say, maybe, but I think so. Obviously, Calvin sees Hobbes as real, but the next closest person would probably be Susie, and then to a lesser extent, Calvin's mom.
Right.
As far as people who see Hobbes as real in any sort of way.
Yeah, and who treat him like he's real. Yeah, I agree.
Because Susie even invites Hobbes to her birthday party, and then you can bring that kid along if you want to.
Yeah, if you must.
Yeah, and she actually asked Hobbes to be her Valentine at one point. So
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't for you. That was for Hobbes.
I was like, Hobbes. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting and sort of charming part of the strip too. So again, Susie doesn't see Hobbes as real in the same way Calvin does, but she does see him as real in a certain kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. So Hobbes is a double agent. He gives up the water balloon, and Calvin comes in. Yeah, and I can't remember exactly what he says, but then he's like, "Oh, whoa, what, whoa!" And Susie has this great look on her face, and then she splooshes him with the water balloon, and so Calvin is just livid with Hobbes.
Understandably so.
Yeah, first Tiger, Hobbes a traitor, and
I think they start fighting too.
Yeah, and I love Hobbes's line, "I'd do it again in a minute. Susie likes my jams."
That's true. Doesn't he maybe earlier in the arc too say something like he's a sucker for a girl in a swimsuit or something?
Yes.
Or am I thinking something? Okay.
I think that's the same arc, yeah. And yeah, because it was something like, "I was beguiled by her feminine charms." I may be mixing that up with something else, but yeah, he's like,
he definitely says that at one point.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he does say something specifically about, a girl in a bathing suit. What a babe. Yeah. And then as we come to the end of this episode, we got to talk about the end of summer. So we're going to, unfortunately, maybe go out on a little bit of a melancholy note this time. I apologize, listeners, but it seemed fitting. So generally, Calvin is unhappy about the end of summer because school is starting. Of course, there's that one exception that we talked about before.
Right.
But he's got to cram in all the goofing off he's been meaning to do. And
it's very stressful.
Yeah. And then there's one where Hobbes says, well, why not make the best of the time that you have left? And he says, "No, I can't. I've reserved the rest of the month for moping." And
wow, the rest of the month, that's a lot.
Yeah. Well, we don't know how much of the month is left, I guess, but
that's true. It is still kind of like, though, like when Calvin gets made to make his room, it's like, oh man, this will take all day. How could this possibly take all day? Well, it'll be another hour before I'm even done griping about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, same idea. And then there's one where it's July, and I like that it's really, July is well into summer, but you're not that close to school starting yet. But it's like, it's July already. What happened to June? We got to have more fun. We got to pack it all in. Ron, it's half an hour later than it was half an hour ago.
Yeah, which I will say sometimes I think that sort of thing from, semi-ironically, but maybe if I'm, working on something or there's, a time crunch, it's like, oh no, it's already a half an hour since I last checked or something. It's like, no, the time's slipping away. So I tend to think about this particular episode of Calvin's fairly often.
Yeah. And so there's not a lot about the end of summer. I will say I'm going to go into the school year just a little bit because Susie says that she likes when school starts. And so Calvin just kind of stares at her and then he goes, "Your bangs do a good job covering up the lobotomy stitches." So very different perspectives on the end of summer here.
Exactly. Yeah. Or at least the beginning of school, which are kind of the same thing. But
yeah. And then there's one that you brought up where Mom sees Miss Wormwood in a place that Calvin doesn't feel teachers have any business being. So he'll just send us off with that one, maybe.
That's right. So his mom just tells him, "Oh, I saw your teacher, Miss Wormwood, in the supermarket. She said to say hi." And Calvin's like completely flummoxed by this. Like, what?
I'm sorry, you saw her where?
Yeah. She's like, "Well, what did you think? Teachers have to shop too." And he says, "Well, I don't know. I just kind of thought teachers slept in a coffin all summer."
Which, it's funny, but also, I didn't think that specifically, but as a kid, it was like, wait, you're outside the school? Is that even allowed? Like,
yeah, no, exactly. I was the same. Like, again, not that I thought they slept in coffins, but I remember like if my mom told me she like saw one of my teachers, or maybe I did somewhere other than school, it's like, what? For real? That can happen? And it's like, in some sense, these are human beings. Of course, they're going to be other places than the school or their job or what have you. But as a kid, it just kind of floors you a little bit, or at least it did me. It's like that.
Yeah.
Huh?
I mean, even in like middle school, I remember one time seeing one of my teachers at, I don't know, some restaurant or something. And I was just completely thrown off. Like, I was old enough to be like, well, yeah, obviously she has a life outside of school. But I was still like, I have no idea. She said hi to me, and I was like, I have no idea how to interact with you in this setting. Like, this is completely weird. Can we just move on? And I didn't have any animosity towards this teacher. It was just like, nope, I don't. This is not right. I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, it does not compute.
Yeah.
I was slightly older than middle school, so ninth grade actually. I remember like my dad and I went to this one restaurant that I liked, and then my history teacher was there like grading papers. And so it's like, oh, okay. So I said hi, and he was like, oh, you know what? I'll just grade yours right now. I was like, oh, okay. And
Great.
fortunately, I did a good job on it, so it was good. But yeah, but it was just kind of a weird experience. Like, oh, hey, there he is. Which I will say, I actually really enjoyed his class. So, Mr. Lichtenstein, if you happen to be listening, shout out to you. You were a great teacher. I'm sure I told you back then, but I had a lot of fun in your history class. So
nice. I'm gonna say though, I feel a little bad that he had to be grading papers while he was eating in a restaurant. It makes me a little sad, but good teacher, so that's good.
I mean, I guess I don't know. At the time, the impression I got was just sort of like, oh, wouldn't it be fun? I can have this nice food while I do my grading or something.
Yeah.
So I guess you're right.
True.
It could have been the other way. Oh man, I can't even enjoy my food without grading. But
we'll take that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, when I've taught myself, I would like to go usually to a coffee shop or something and grade. So from at least my own perspective, I think there's some reason to think it's like the positive version of it rather than.
Yeah, that's true. I like that better. I got to grade the papers. I may as well go somewhere, and have a nice meal while I'm doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, Mr. Lichtenstein, if you're listening, I hope that's what was going on and you weren't just so stressed you couldn't even enjoy your food without grading. So just throwing that out.
Yeah. All right. And having talked about the end of summer, that's the end of the episode. How's that for a segue?
That is quite the segue. Since Calvin always wants to extend summer and not end it, I too am going to extend the episode with one more question.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. So we talked a lot about water balloons and Calvin's water balloon fights. Do you have a memory like that really stands out of a water balloon fight when you were a kid?
So my experience with water balloons is they don't work. Like you throw them at someone and they just bounce off and land in the grass and explode and don't get the person wet. Maybe I'm just throwing water balloons wrong. But
okay.
I've never been successful soaking someone with a water balloon. But to your question, yes, I did have water fights as a kid. I think I tend to prefer using squirt guns, super soakers, that sort of thing, because that's more effective for getting the other person and you getting wet. So, but yeah, my brother and I would do it all the time. Sometimes like at church activities, we would do a water fight outside or, stuff like that. So yeah, I liked water fights. How about you?
Right. Yeah, so actually, it's funny you mentioned the bouncing off thing because in the story I'm thinking of now, there was someone who was pretty good at managing to like deflect the water balloons. So I know what you're talking about there, but we also had success with some of the water balloons too. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay.
But that being said, the thing that stands out the most, so this, like you mentioned, this was actually like a church youth group kind of thing. It was a summer water fight. So we filled up a bunch of water balloons. But when someone wasn't looking, what I did, I took a balloon. It was pink, and that'll be important for a second. And instead of filling it with water, I just blew it up with air.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I pretended it had water. So one of the like youth group leaders was there. So I started running after him like, yeah, I'm going to get you with a water balloon. She's like, oh, no. She ran away. So when I caught up, and then I threw my water balloon, but of course it just had air, so it just flowed. It's like, oh, you tricked me. Ha ha. It's like, ha ha ha, I tricked you. Okay. So then I went and got another pink balloon and I filled this one with water.
Nice.
Yeah. So then I ran up to her again. I was like, yeah. She's like, oh, yeah, like I'm going to fall. So I completely splashed her with what was really a water balloon now. And so I tricked her a second time. So
Good work.
thank you. Yeah, I was pretty proud of that one, actually. So I think
Yeah.
Calvin would be too, now that I think
Oh
about
yeah,
it.
I could see that something like that having been a Calvin and Hobbes strip.
That's right. Yeah. But yeah, so to this day, I'm still proud of myself for my water balloon trickery.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, I don't have any specific memories like that. I remember having water fights, but that's a good one. I like that.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So now, listeners, it's the end of the episode, but don't worry, summer always comes again, and we'll be back with another episode in about 10 days. So, listeners, if you would like to email us about your thoughts of your memories of summer or anything at all, really, you can.
Or water balloons or seeing teachers in weird places.
And if any of your teachers did sleep in coffins, you can email us at magiccandh@proton.me. That's MAGICCANDH@proton.me. As always, we'll have a link in the show notes you can click if you don't want to try to remember all that.
And as always, this is a completely free podcast and a completely ad-free podcast. It's just a fan celebration of having fun with this iconic and amazing comic strip. So we would love for you to come along with us and celebrate it together.
Absolutely. And in the spirit of summer, let's go exploring. You've been listening to The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. We'll be releasing 40 episodes all throughout the year, from November 18th, 2025 to November 18th, 2026, to celebrate the 40th anniversary. Our intro and outro music is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, referenced in the Calvin and Hobbes strip published on October 8, 1986. This rendition was performed by the Skidmore College Orchestra and made available under a Creative Commons license on museopen.com. We hope you'll join us next episode for more fun.